Hey there, welcome back to Stay Sharp with Razor Leaf, the show where digital transformation meets the shop floor, the boardroom, and everywhere in between. Thanks for tuning in. So what happens when someone has sat on every side of the table as an engineer, a reseller, a vendor, and an analyst, and has watched the same industry from four completely different vantage points? Today, we're talking with someone who's done exactly that, and she's got some pointed opinions about the gaps nobody is studying, the surveys nobody trusts, and where AI hype is about to meet organizational reality. Let's jump in. Welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, the podcast about all things digital related to products from manufacturing to service and beyond. I'm one of your hosts, Juliann Grant, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Jonathan. Always good to see you here.
Glad to be here. Having a fun conversation today.
Yeah, one of our favorite things to do. So today we are talking with someone who's had a very interesting career path in PLM and digital engineering. And she has spent her entire career doing something most people in engineering software have not, which is connecting what happens to the factory floor to what happens in the boardroom. We welcome one of our colleagues and friends, Christine Longwell from PLM Insights. Welcome, Christine.
Always nice to see some old friends.
Indeed. It's great to have you on the show. We've been talking about this for a while. Yes. Older for some. Yes, as far as we found out.
I think I matched that. When you say old friends, I think the gray means that I'm the old friend.
Yeah, gray things coming in, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
Well, the length of time I've known you guys.
Yeah, indeed. It's been a few years. So let me tell you a little bit about Christine's background, because I hadn't been as familiar with it, and when I was preparing for this, it's pretty interesting. So she started her career as a mechanical engineer out of Maryland and worked on hybrid powertrains for Ford and PLM administration at Daimler Chrysler, before crossing into software at Trimex Solutions and later keeping production humming through a major plant relocation at Fort Proterra. So she went from engineer working on hands-on on products and then went to a reseller. So that's interesting. And then from there, she became a CAD blogger and a SolidWorks user group leader, which led to 5 years and as a competitive analyst in Siemens PLM. So keeping up with their sales and executive teams ahead of every competitive move in the market, which is not easy to do, especially for the big guys. And since then, she's held go-to-market roles for Aris and Anarch, and most recently served as a director of research at SimData, where she was owning the global PLM market model. And today, she's actually turned that whole ecosystem of experience into her own independent analyst consulting practice. And she's helping companies navigate product strategy, the digital thread, and product development in the age of AI. So I asked for a quick fun fact for Christine, and she reminded me that she is a great ceramic potter. So she likes to make a lot of pottery, as you can see in her background. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
I love it. I'm going to jump right in. So, it's interesting, Christine, like we were talking about a second ago. I've watched your career over the years, right? We've interacted multiple times at different places. And we originally crossed paths through Trimec, right? A place we both worked back in the late 90s. But the thing that I think is so interesting to talk about today is the perspective you've developed from seeing so many sides of the digital engineering industry, right? You've used the tools on the user side and at both a reseller and a software vendor on that other side, right? And you've worked on the analyst side, seeing things from both angles of that customer-vendor relationship. So anyway, I'm going to start by going back to the user side of things. So I know you worked inside of Ford and Chrysler and sold and built software at Trimec and Siemens, and you've analyzed the whole industry from the outside at SimData. What's the one lesson from the factory floor back at the beginning that still shapes how you evaluate and look at technology today?
So in terms of the factory floor, I think something really interesting to note is that before I went to work in industry, I actually was working at Trimec as an intern. So I was aware of the digital engineering marketplace while it was still very young and was still very exciting. So the tools and methodology part really was my interest in the beginning, so that when I went to Ford, all of the questions that I had were, how do you do this? How do you do this? What's the best process for this? So even from my first job out of college, I was really assessing the business of the engineering software field. And I think the one thing that has really surprised me was the fact that there are so many ways to get something done at a customer site. that I think it was you actually who has said we can automate all of your processes, but it doesn't mean that we should.
Right.
Because you can automate a bad practice.
That's a good point, Jonathan.
That does sound like you, doesn't it?
I will say, I think I stole that from our late friend Paul Gimbel, who I think said, you can, if your process is crap, you can just make crap faster if you automate it. Yeah, something like that. But
that sounds about right.
In the ballpark.
Exactly. But once you do automate some of these processes that are held together by duct tape and baling wire, we often find that a different sub-process was hooked to it. And once you've automated that and made that better, this other thing falls apart. And they're like, where's my Excel file? What do you mean I don't have the Excel file anymore? So, really, to really study the market, you really need to get on the ground with users and walk a mile in their shoes, which is something that I've always been committed to. And it's amazing how much I learned about our market by working with people in tech support. Because all day you're getting an insight into these people's problems.
Well,
yeah,
true.
no, I think that's interesting. So not just the factory floor, but if you're talking to somebody who does support directly for people who are at the front lines of whatever the software is we're talking about, you're getting the real stories then.
100%. And when you're in a sales environment, getting to do these shop tours and listening to the way people buy software is probably one of the best ways to actually know what's going on in the market. In addition to everybody out there should be doing win-loss analysis if you're a software vendor.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And not enough people do that, But I have to agree with that comment about walking the shop floor. There's nothing like a plant floor tour that will help clarify things very quickly about, how technology is applied or what it's doing, what it's not doing. I've always learned so much in doing that, so I'd have to agree. But let's talk a little bit about the transition where you went from being an engineer solving problems to being a vendor on the solution side of selling. What were the biggest gaps you saw between the two that a software company could learn from as well as a customer?
Well, it's funny. I was seeing gaps between what industry was providing, what customers needed, back when I was still in college at TriMech. I was realizing that some software developers without experience back in the 90s were a little bit tone deaf. So I really had to, get on the factory floor. I think one of the hardest things for software companies to understand is the diversity in the ways that companies operate. Small and medium-sized businesses, for example, are very misunderstood. It's really difficult to get qualified research information about them because these are people with a whole lot less resources trying to do the same thing as bigger companies. They just don't have the time, the money, the tools, the IT support to do some of these things. So these processes are, it's the Wild West out there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Christine. Like I see that all the time, that you got this idealized version based on what the software vendor thinks, and they probably developed that through working with a couple of their largest customers, right, who are the ones kind of yelling the loudest, I need this feature, I need that feature, and they go and they talk to them, and all right, how do you work? And they have this well-documented process or SOP about how they work. And then so that gets codified in the software somehow, or a blend of those from their customers, and they take it to the small and medium business, and the small and medium business is like, no, I just do this and do that and get it done, right? And they're like, oh, this thing, the software, it's so formal, it's whatever. And you see that, right? You see that kind of conflict of, it's hard to know how some small operations and medium-sized operations really work because they don't get studied as much. I know what you mean about that gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, the people who do find it and see it, any sense about that? I mean, with the number of places you've worked, have you seen companies that did seem to have a smaller gap there? What they did to figure that out, to understand more about what their customers are doing, not just the biggest of those customers. Anything you think that they do to make that happen?
Well, I think the larger the company, the larger the budget, and these are the white whales. These are the companies that are being studied. These are the companies whose needs are being addressed. But on the smaller side, it's a little bit concerning. Juliann and I were actually talking a little earlier about trying to get responses back on surveys, for example. Survey data from
Nobody
small and
wants to answer a
medium-sized
survey.
business.
Yeah.
No, and
You don't have time either. You're just so busy. You're running the business,
And the other problem now is surveys are frequently populated by bots because the industry is paying for survey responses. And if you're going to pay for survey responses, we're going to find you some survey responses. I mean, they might be in a sweatshop in a country that we don't want to talk about, but you don't know who these people are filling out this information, and it is a large gap. My proposal for fixing it has actually, Juliann and I were talking about it a little bit earlier, to formulate some customer research panels that are independent. I do think that Dassault gets a really good amount of information through their SolidWorks channel. So
they do have that benefit of having that smaller market there.
Yeah, but the question is, how would Dassault get information about customers that aren't their customers?
Right. Yeah.
And
there's always that, little conundrum,
have.
Right? Yeah. Especially when you're doing product development.
Well, while we're on this topic about analysts, I had a question about that and the analyst world today, right? Because it seems like, I don't know, it just seems like there's something going on, and maybe I can't quite put my finger on it, but it feels like a split between the established legacy vendors and the research that happens there and what we're looking for, what we're asking, and the kinds of studies that come out, and the startups, right? The really novel and innovative. And I'm not saying that nobody's covering that, right? I know we've got a mutual friend, and I think you look at some of this. There's several people looking at it, but are we getting, in general, the coverage we need for all the changes that are happening because of AI and all these startups that are showing up? Do we get what we need in terms of information about the industry?
I've been following this industry very, very closely for, over 25 years. And in the time that I've been following it, I would say that there has been more chaos and more shift in dynamics in the last 2 years because of AI. The first year that I was at SimData, there was a lot of speculation about AI. I think now, and then everything was AI. Of the press releases that I looked at, 70% of them used AI in the subject line, despite the fact that there is nothing AI about this software. What is AI, after all? But it has to be in the press release. If something's going to be acquired, it has to be in the press release. But I think now we're cresting the hump, and the hype is dying down a little bit, where the rubber meets the road, and people are realizing that this is not going to be magic. On the customer side.
But is that when you think about what we talk about? I agree. There's so much hype around AI, and it makes a lot of noise. But when that all settles, are we going to be talking about these small firms and small softwares, right? So not the SMB side of the customer space, but more is the software out there? Where's it going? Who are they serving? Is it working? Is it just startup money being burned? Like, are we looking at that enough, or can we? I don't know.
It's hard. It's really difficult because we are in such a place of uncertainty in our whole industry right now, that if anybody tells you that they know where AI is going, I would not trust that person at this point, because there is so much speculation. All I can say is we are anticipating change. We should be anticipating change. What that's going to look like, I have opinions. A lot of people have opinions. We're going to see, there's going to be some wait and see. One of my opinions, I think that we're going to see some ERP convergence. I think that the management of a product is going to be sucked back into becoming more of a business function than an engineering function overall. But that does not mean that engineering is going to lay off the throttle of the digital transformation that they're doing within the engineering organizations.
So are you suggesting that ERP is going to start incorporating more PLM type functionality in its systems, or I was trying to read between the lines there.
I'm thinking so. So, we have Oracle that puts PLM in their supply chain management suite. Same with SAP. On the Microsoft Dynamics front end, we have Blue Star PLM. So I think that those companies are in a pretty good place to be managing product information, particularly around the supply chain area. AI is going to do a lot for supply chain planning with the global uncertainty and what's going on with trade and tariffs and things like that. Everybody is looking to digitalize their supply chain in a pretty massive way.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the ones going down, this SMB, the Oracle and SAP are great for the enterprise. How good are they about reaching the SMB? Because those guys need it just as much as everybody else.
Well, I think Blue Star might be in a better position for that. But I think for SMBs still struggle with PDM, not PLM, but SMBs still struggle with PDM. And I think that, the open bombs on top of, maybe an existing data management structure will definitely see a good time.
Yeah, I think that's one of those, coming back to the last couple of questions we were talking about gaps of what we know about the industry. I see the same thing anecdotally, right? I don't have any research to back it up, but small and medium businesses who say, you know what, cloud software is easy enough to get it and try it and check it out. And I see people piecing together their solutions to solve little business problems. And like you said, adoption of PDM is even a struggle in that space. But people have a problem, they pick up a tool, they kind of try and tie it together, and they keep moving, right? Because their processes are so dynamic.
Okay, what you just said right there, I don't have any research to back it up. I'm going to stop you and say you do have research to back it up, Jonathan, because you're in the trenches with these people. So that's another opportunity that I see that we as analysts have missed a little bit, and that is capturing a lot of this allegorical information from our service partner providers. If I was working in the industry right now and I was being faced with marketing information that, like I said, if somebody says they know what the future of AI is going to be, don't trust that person. In the same way, if you're seeing marketing coming out of a software vendor that you think might be a little suspicious, I would absolutely trust the services provider that you're working with, the systems integrator, people like you who are in the trenches with the people who are implementing this software right now.
So why do you think that voice has been undervalued? Because that's something we see as well, but I mean, not just race, but the SI, category in general.
It just has not been well articulated. I think that it used to be when I entered this industry, and actually I think even in the 2010s, the model was still that an organization would pick a business would pick a software, and then they would find somebody to put it in. And I think that our current ecosystem economy has changed in the last 10, 15 years to the point where some really smart companies are picking their services provider who can help them understand what the best and most optimal tech stack is for a business of their type and size. And then together go out and source the software to bring it in. They have a services organization, a partner, holding their hand before they make that selection.
I mean, I love that model, Christine, right? I mean, we've done that plenty of times at Razorleaf, but I do see that it's the minority. And if you see that it's changing, I think that's great, because I think the customers we've had who have done that have felt like the results were really what they wanted. And, unfortunately, a lot of times they ended up down that path with us because of stubbing their toe on the
because
first path.
They made a mistake.
Yeah.
And they need your help getting out of it.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes actually Razor Leaf has also done a fair amount of business with folks who did make a mistake in terms of they went down a path buying a software and saying, oh man, it wasn't right for us, because they focused software first, not needs first.
Yes.
Oh, we're growing, we must need that. Let's go get one. They get one on, demos, features, functions, that kind of thing. And then say, we have no idea how to put this in place, right? And in the process, sometimes we have to deliver hard news like, I don't know that you bought the right thing, and that's tough. So I love it, obviously, that you're sort of highlighting, you think that the industry is changing in that way, because I do think people can get better outcomes by saying, well, let me work with somebody who knows the space well first and then figure out what I need, right? Rather than go the opposite.
Well, there are so many opportunities to make mistakes in our industry that I think that the industry as a whole is starting to understand that proper advice on the front end is really the way to go. I know a lot of companies will buy a software because that's what he used at the last company.
Right.
Yeah, it's comfort zone.
And then you come into this company, it's like, oh, the rest of the tech stack on the back end is different. So, we didn't use that CAD over there. This isn't working with our systems.
Right. Well, yeah, it's interesting because even, when we get sent surveys to complete, and it's always about, growth and market data and industry growth and things like that. And it's never really about practicality of, system gaps, that kind of a thing, where to help people get smarter about what, what kind of decisions make a big difference from one thing to another. And I suppose, it may or may not be the role of the analyst, but it's interesting to see because, when you get these things and we always see the surveys and it's a lot of times it's not really questions we can answer. So for the research, but it's funny, you were talking about, how people have to learn. And I was thinking the phrase fail fast, because in this whole world of AI, like you're saying, don't trust anyone who says they know the future. And I do think people need to, experiment and do different things and try to apply AI and fail fast to kind of figure it out. I think that's the only way we're really going to figure it out. But what have you seen, or what are you seeing in the AI and how it may evolve in the next few years without, trying to make a hard, fast prediction?
For me, the biggest thing that I see is convergence. I really think that we're going to see some of these silos come together. But also, having followed the industry for a long time, I realize that we have technical silos mostly because we have people silos. And AI is not going to change those people silos. So I think organizations, there are going to be a lot of organizations that are looking into organizational change management. I think right now there have been a lot of layoffs. People are getting rid of people that they think are going to become redundant. But I think that that's going to stop once they realize that we do have these people organizational silos. And until you can get the entire company rowing in the same direction, we're going to have to just put a hold on this AI horse.
It's such an interesting point you make. I tend to agree with you, right? That the people silos are going to protect the tech silos, and it's going to maybe put a roadblock in the way of some of this AI, some of the vision people have for how AI is going to converge an organization and get all the right information in the right places, that kind of thing. And it is fascinating. We work a lot on integration projects. So we see lots of times you get to that border between system A and system B. And if there are teams that work across that border, integration projects go pretty smoothly because the people and their silos are sort of incented to make the tech and the data flow. But you get to these integration projects where it's like, well, team A has this system and team B has that system. And there's somebody at a higher level who wants them to work better together, but it's still two different silos. you watch the friction emerge, right? And so to your point, I'm just using an integration project as a proxy for what you're saying. When we think AI is suddenly going to solve this, are we just going to see the same problem emerge? So it's interesting what you're saying there.
People are still going to guard their data fiefdoms. There's something natural about us as people that when you're talking about making people collaborate where they might not want to, it's like, can you really force your children to get along?
Right. That's a good question.
You can make them be pleasant to each other, but you can't actually really make them like each other sometimes. And these things are at an organizational level. I know Share PLM is doing a lot of organizational change management in Europe, and I've talked to Helena, and American companies operate in a way that might not be optimal for their business model.
Yeah, no, we've experienced that. We've been partners with them for quite a while, and we bring that angle to a number of projects talking about organizational change. And it's not that it's universal in terms of how people react, but we do see a lot of pushback in the U.S. with sort of how organizations and their cultures operate and think about organizational change. We got it. People will know. We don't need to tell them. Our employees understand. Like, we get a lot of interesting pushback on that front. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. I think I put a post up on LinkedIn a while ago, and it wasn't something that I thought. It was really a question for the industry. The old book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
It's about how to deal with change in a way that you see change as an opportunity. And, I am curious right now to hear from the industry where AI is going to bring new cheese. And I just don't think that people are understanding it yet.
No, I think that's right. And I think that's reflected in all the noise we hear, right? There are people who are excited about it. There are people who are worried about it. And there's everything in between. And it's nothing settled out yet. And it's not just a conversation in our industry, right? We probably all see it in terms of news and politics and things like that too. So it's going to be a while before I think we know where this lands.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll see if they can get all the data centers built that they're planning to build, and if people actually want to agree with that, even at that level, right? So you're right. It's at every level of the environment today.
I haven't looked, but whenever the Gartner hype cycle comes out for the year, I'm suspecting that we might be at that top inflection point.
Right.
The peak of what's it called?
I remember what that was called. I remember the trough of disillusionment, but I can't
remember
remember the peak.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but we might hit that fast because, you never know. I think there's just so much going on and so many tools coming out and so many startups coming up that, as our friend Fino has been sharing all the different startups in the area. And I think that it's reminding me a little bit of, the last little bubble we had of all the big startups when the internet came out, but hopefully it's not as much of a bubble. Let's just hope for that.
Yeah. I mean, the internet wasn't a bubble, but of course.
No, but the startups were,
Yeah.
And then we had a little bust for a little bit, but it was reality coming in to check in. That's all. So I hope that we've learned from that and we can manage that better.
One of the biggest questions that I have with all of these AI startups, and I had the great opportunity to go to Fino's Threaded conference down in Miami, meet with some of these startups that have fabulous new products. But one of the lingering questions in my mind is, how will a startup go to market in what has become such an ecosystem economy and nobody knows who to trust?
Right.
So I'm envisioning, something like a Trimex, something like a reseller that has a portfolio.
Right. Somebody that's close to the customer, that the customer trusts, and then they act as a proxy and go out and find the new tools, the new capabilities that they trust, and they bring that, not exactly a reseller, like you're saying, but something with a trust model.
Yeah. Somehow that will happen. I don't know who. I do think that's one of these AI cheese opportunities.
That makes sense.
That somebody somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. I got something I want to make sure I ask before we get to the end of our time.
Yeah.
Because I know, Christine, you're, sort of in this new venture of your own. And I want to know, when you think about all the history that you've had, the different angles you've looked at it from, being on your own, what can you do now that you couldn't do previously or that you're bringing to the table? What should people know about that the perspective you're bringing, that if they're interested in your kind of work, what you're doing, that they should know? Like, hey, here's what Christine's up to. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, kind of like AI, this is all new to me.
Sure.
So I have been throwing some stuff against the wall. I would love to get back into my tech support roots, my actually talking to some customers. Juliann and I were talking before the call about the creation of potentially a customer research panel where I would have, instead of sending surveys to Malaysia or whatever, where I would have maybe 100 people from industry who are validated, who I know who these people are, to try to work with these people to see not how they feel about vendor X, but, larger questions about the industry. So getting back to real customer research at this point. I also see that convergence in our industry is happening. I would like to found what I do off of data that I licensed from other people. There are some great data sets out there that I could look at, but I still haven't quite. Yeah. I have a list of a couple. I mean, like Fino's data set on the startups. I'm collaborating with him. We might be working together. There are a couple of other data providers who have some great data sources. And I think one of the great things that I have learned about AI is that it's the bringing together of data sets when you overlay the opinion and the experience that you can start to see the trends.
Yeah.
So some of that, I think you're saying, is like synthesis of existing data, looking at the things differently by putting different pieces together.
Yes.
And I think you also mentioned doing more in the SMB space in particular, right?
I think that the SMB space, there just has not been much of a research methodology that's been effective in really unearthing how these people are doing business. And how that will change.
Yeah. And partnering that with your independent customer panel and see if you can, get some voices together to start, maybe driving change in the industry from this to the software vendors as opposed to the software vendors driving the change. So that would be interesting. Well,
and also working with services companies. Jonathan, like you said, I don't have the research to show it. You know,
it's a question of pulling that out as data. Yeah,
it's research. If you work with companies and you're making annotations about, it's in there.
Well, this has been great, Christine. Thanks so much for your time today. I think we're going to have to move to our summary as we're running up on our time. But this has been a great conversation, and we appreciate you sharing, what you have cooking over there. It's good to see you developing new business.
I don't know quite how I'm going to put this together in a summary, Juliann. I've been making notes.
I saw you writing notes. Let's see if your Claude-esque type summary can.
This one might be a reach for me. It's been a good flowing conversation, but we'll see how I did. All right, here's what I think we talked about.
Okay.
So starting off with kind of what you took from the beginning of your career, Christine, and factory floor lessons and that sort of thing. I think you mentioned that you were always interested in process and methods even before being on the factory floor. That's some of what drove you to have that part of your career. And the takeaway I heard was that there's always multiple ways to do a process, and you have to think about that. You have to think about whether something should be automated before you jump in and do it. And what's the impact going to be when you do try to automate it? And the really key lesson I took away from your comments there is that you really need to see a process firsthand. And that, interestingly, tech support people on the software side often have the most interesting sort of collection of that, right? You can go do it, but tech support people talk with lots of folks who do it every day. So from there, we moved into the
CSMs.
perception. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Listen to your CSMs.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
From there, we talked about the perception and reality gap from what software vendors kind of think about their customers and what's actually happening at their customers. And yeah, I think you pointed out that some vendors just aren't always close enough to their customers. They have to work at it to get that kind of information. And other things that make it tough are the variability in customers, because that leads to variability in their processes, which makes it tough for software vendors to know, because lots of companies just behave and operate in very different ways. And it's really tough to know how small companies work, which got us into talking a little bit about gaps. I'll come back to that in a minute. But we moved on to talking about analysts and how analysts cover the industry. And do we have the right coverage there? And I think you highlighted that the changes with AI in the last 2 years have made things so dynamic, so much noise. It's tough to know, are we covering all the right things, or are we just covering what we used to cover? And I think you highlighted a great figure, like 70% of press releases now have AI in the subject line, whether there's any AI involved or not. And that makes perfect sense to me. Another thing you highlighted is there's things going on with like maybe ERP convergence coming up that we aren't seeing or aren't getting enough coverage of necessarily right now. So I think maybe your point was there are some gaps happening in terms of what we know is happening in the industry or what we see and what we're hearing about, but it's just not coming through. The signal isn't coming through the noise there. I think we talked about SIs. You mentioned a couple of things that make me feel better at Raise Relief about the work that we do. So thanks for that. But that when we think that the the information coming out of SIs isn't very loud. And Juliann, you're asking about why is that? Why don't we hear about that? You mentioned, there's a traditional way that a lot has happened in our industry with pick a software, pick a partner, get it deployed. And that seems to be shifting some because people are recognizing that value in somebody who's done the work, giving insight before somebody picks a tool and goes down a road. I think that's very interesting. And then as we talked about AI and what role it's playing, you mentioned silos, right? And that the people silos may sort of maintain or keep the tech silos that we think AI is going to break down. And I think that's really interesting. I love the term you used, that data fiefdoms, right? That people have when they say, look, my data, you can't have access to it. That's all been that way for a long time. Is AI really going to break through that? Or are we going to need organizational change to really see some of the benefits that we're talking about with AI? And then lastly, we moved on to talking about what you're going to be offering and sort of what perspective you're bringing to the table. And you mentioned a couple of ideas, things you're working on, leveraging existing data sets, synthesizing information that maybe people haven't looked at in a specific way today to bring them some of that insight, gathering independent panels of customers to get some of this research that maybe is tough to get another way that's not through, paper survey kinds of things. And looking at and helping SMBs, right, with what they're trying to do, as well as studying them and getting more information. And the last nugget that I took away, and I didn't know quite where to put this, but I thought it was really interesting, your point about as the industry shifts, are we going to see this move back to not necessarily a reseller model, but some kind of trust model where customers in that SMB space are going to trust a smaller company that's more focused on their needs, their niche, their industry, their whatever. And then those folks go out and curate the kind of noisy space of what are startups doing? What can AI do for them? All these things. So I thought that was an interesting thought that you had there. I'm sure I missed stuff. So if there's anything I missed, please jump in, or if not, a parting thought that you have for people. But that's my summary for now, Juliann. That's the best I could do.
Pretty good.
Mostly the return of the distributor, software distributors, because companies were going all direct. I think we'll see some return of the distributor. I have one other thing I thought I lost yet.
Hate when that happens.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that was a pretty good summary, Jonathan. And Christine, if you think of that thing, we can always try to add that back in somehow. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank our listeners today for joining us and listening in to this conversation and learning a little bit more about what Christine Longwell's up to these days. And did you get it?
I remember.
All right.
Juliann, as you said, win-loss analysis is really hard to do. Guess what? The best win-loss analysis is done by an independent third party.
That is true.
So if anybody wants that done.
And I'm really glad you
Yeah.
brought that back up because I meant to bring it up earlier and I forgot as well. So good, great point. And not enough companies do them. I don't, that's part of the challenges.
Well, because somebody doesn't want to talk to you after you've lost a sale.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, with that, we again thank everybody. And as you know, we can cover a lot of different topics, and there are a lot of things to keep talking about. So, if you have any suggestions for future conversations, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments for Christine or a question for Christine, make sure you make a comment or send us a note at podcast@raiseleaf.com. We will be happy to put you in contact with her. And with that, we hope you join us for episodes in the future. And we hope everyone takes time to stay sharp. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.